As I look back over my life, it's full of surprises. I never thought I would become friends with people in different countries all over the world.
For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son.
I want us to look at the cross tonight.
I see how God's hand guided me.
Love one another.
When I began preaching many years ago, it was not with any thoughts that I'd be preaching to large audiences.
Come to the cross. His gospel is for everyone.
God has done this.
Christ is alive. And I think it's very important that we find out what is a born-again Christian and what is a born-again Christian supposed to be like. And how do you become born again? Now, I don't mean how do you become a Democrat or a Republican. I mean, how do you become born again? Have a new birth.
Everywhere I go, people ask me, some of them hopefully ask me, when are you going to retire? And I tell them that there's nobody that I find in the Bible that retired. I'll retire when God retires me, not till then.
Well, I love Dr. Graham. He's been good to me over the years. Some almost, 20 years ago, I was eating supper with him one night there at the Cove. And I said, now, Dr. Graham, I hope you don't mind me imitating you tonight in front of your staff and family. I was nervous. First time to ever get to meet him. And he leaned over to me and he said, you could take over. But he was a gracious man. He was a good sport, about me when I would come up there many times to do events. And I've gone all over the country and the world, when I entertain people, encourage people. Whenever I do my voice impersonations, they're always, everyone wants me, to do Dr. Billy Graham. And, to me, it's the greatest form of flattery, to imitate someone, especially someone like him, his voice, his warmth, the style that he preached. You can grasp it all in his voice. So when I do his voice, people, they just love it. They enjoy it because, it embodies who he has been, who he is, and where he is now in heaven.
Obviously, it is quite humorous, and you are so spot on when you imitate him. But obviously, outside of his voice and his style, he had to have an impact on you for you to even pick up on that. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. When I was growing up in Austin, Texas, we had one channel, KTBC, and because Lady Bird owned it. But anyhow, I remember, man, when those Billy Graham crusades would come on, and we'd all sit there together as a family, and I can just remember him, saying things like, just write me, Billy Graham, Minneapolis, Minnesota, or Winnipeg, Manitoba, or Oki-Wan Kenobi, or just, and we'd laugh about that, and I remember those phrases, and, that your family will wait for you, and, won't you come, and we have some literature. And I remember just the way he said literature, But the biggest impact, of course, was the gospel message that I would hear from him. And so finally, when I was 17, and I finally came to that point in my life, challenge to accept Christ, I couldn't help but even then on that Monday night, March 15th, 1971, when I was about to make that decision, I had flashback in my head to sitting there in our little den in our little 900 square foot house and hearing Billy Graham talk about making a decision and coming forward and come publicly, to express your faith in the Lord Jesus. And I remember that night I said, well, it's about time I do what Billy Graham said I needed to do, and I was thinking about it. I was telling some of my boys, my wife, I said, my dad, Floyd Leon, I always talk about my daddy. He's been with the Lord for 5 years. I said, maybe Floyd Leon was there in the welcoming committee for Dr. Graham, and then I thought, no, I have a feeling maybe those that were up front in the welcoming committee were the thousands and thousands that first heard the gospel message from him and made a decision under his ministry. I thought, man, what a welcoming group. That's and you know, it challenged me to think, well, who would be in my welcoming group or committee? People that I've touched for Christ or led to the Lord. And I do remember one time I was sitting with him. Back when his wife Ruth was alive, and she was sick at home, and I asked him. I said, Dr. Graham, how's Miss Ruth doing? And he said, well, she's in bed most all the time and watches videos. And I said, well, you know, I've got some videos, DVDs, or back then VHS. Does she have a good sense of humor? And Dr. Graham said, she has a better sense of humor than I do. And I went, oh, Lord, help me. Help me, Jesus.
Oh, that's great.
I'll tell you what, he's experiencing rejoicing and laughter and fulfillment like we can't imagine on this earth. But what a great guy. And his family. I love his family. His grandson, Will, reminded me this morning when I texted him about that phrase that he said, when you read in the paper or hear that I have died, don't you believe it? I'm more alive now than I've ever been before.
Wow.
And the verse is true in Revelation 14:13. If I was to hear him say it, he said, blessed are they that die in the Lord, for their works follow after them. And may I add, forever and ever and ever and ever. His works will follow after him. He's left a legacy
Absolutely.
of love and life and laughter, all because of what Jesus has done for us. So that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Dennis Swanberg, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, well, thanks for having me.
I'm not sure that you can come up with enough words to adequately answer that question. You know, Billy Graham has been a rock for the Christian for, several decades. And the man just gave us a textbook example of how to get through this thing called life. He will be the first to admit that he was not perfect. But at the same time, he tried. He tried to fulfill the instructions that were set forth in the Bible, how to live his life, how to show Christ's love to others, how to walk in the Christian way. And I do know that a lot of the artists in gospel music have a very, very high regard for Dr. Graham and have been for a long time. Dr. Graham was a supporter of Southern gospel music along the way. As a matter of fact, many long-term Southern gospel fans will remember a very iconic photo of Dr. Graham in the Inspirations that appeared in the Singing News in the early 70s, and it has reappeared many times since then. It's a picture of Dr. Graham, the Inspirations, in Dr. Graham's home there in western North Carolina. The Inspirations have been invited to come spend some time with Dr. Graham. And if you reach out to any of those guys who were there at that time, Archie Watkins, Eddie Dietz, any of those members of the Inspirations at that time, they'll all tell you the same thing. They were so impressed with the godly character of Dr. Graham. It made a long-lasting impression upon their lives. And I think that's something that can be said for a lot of the artists in gospel music who had an opportunity to visit with Dr. Graham along the way. Just the sheer character of the man, the sheer presence that he brought into a room is something that they'll always remember. And yes, a lot of them will always strive to develop that same godly character that Dr. Graham exhibited.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I personally was able to see Dr. Graham in 2 crusades in Nashville, probably some of the last ones that he did. And in one, the Gaither Vocal Band was performing with him. So, I do know he was a supporter of Southern gospel music.
He was, and of course, a lot of people equate Southern gospel music and preaching as workmates. Nothing will ever take the chosen method of spreading God's message, which is preaching. But gospel music is a great tool to assist in that. One of the best expressions that I've ever heard used in conjunction with that theory is that Southern gospel many times would open the heart to receive the message. And I think that's one thing that Dr. Graham appreciated about gospel music. And, there's another connection, an indirect connection between Dr. Graham and Singing Youth. Of course, many years Singing Youth was headquartered in Boone, North Carolina. That is also the city where Dr. Graham's son, Franklin, headquarters Samaritan's Purse. So quite frequently you would see the Grahams there in Boone, North Carolina, during the time that Singing Youth was based there. There's your trivia for the day.
There you go. Danny Jones, publisher of Singing News Magazine. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, sir.